What's up guys, welcome back to another GGF video, and today I'll be taking a look at the Antec P120 Crystal chassis. Now if you saw the video last week, I did do the full time-lapse build of this case, and today I'll be doing the full review and the ins and outs of this chassis, and of course I'll be covering all the water cooling features as well. And then at the end of the video, a lot of people did ask in the time-lapse build about the tubing and also about the little screen I used in the power supply area, so we'll cover all of that as well. But before that, a quick word from our sponsor. Do you want the best of the best for your gaming rig? Then look no further than the Intel i9 9900KS processor. With out-of-the-box performance of 5 GHz on all 8 cores, you'll be hitting the frames you need to land those headshots. Pair your 9900KS with the ASRock Z390 Phantom Gaming X for the ultimate combination, featuring an all-new flexible integrated I/O shield for perfect fitment first time, every time. Built-in 2.4GB 802.11ax Wi-Fi 6, Realtek 2.5GB and dual Intel Gigabit Ethernet for a variety of connectivity options. Learn more in the links below. The Antec P120 is definitely more down to earth from what we've recently seen from them. Both the striker and the torque are certainly a lot to take in. The P120's overall design definitely isn't something new, and we've seen quite a lot of manufacturers create their own take on it. This design with that wide inside view to really show off your hardware is becoming more and more popular, but Antec have approached the P120 with a single chamber design rather than a dual chamber like many others. The P120 houses the PSU and hard drives with the rest of your hardware, not behind in a second chamber. I would say both layouts have their own pros and cons. While I'm on the topic of power supplies, I have to give it to Antec on how they've gone about their implementation, and I'd say this is one of the standout parts of the P120. Most brands will slap a rectangular cover over the power supply and call it a day. Antec has what I would say spiced it up a bit.
If you like it a little bit spiced, delightful.
And I think it came out pretty good. Max PSU clearance is up to 294mm, and having the shroud being so long, I'll incorporate that in my final loop layout, so make sure you stay around for that. You'll also notice the case feet tie into the design of the PSU shroud. The main chassis is made from steel, plastic for the feet and some of the PSU shroud, and 4mm thick tempered glass for the main side panel, which has a medium tint. The panel is locked in via a latch and works quite well. Slide the latch down and out pops the side panel. Neat. Rubber dampeners can also be found along the top and bottom of the tempered glass side panel. The main side panel can also be removed, which is always welcomed. Rear side panel is made from steel and is secured in via 2 captive thumb screws, pretty standard here. Case dimensions come in at 485 high, 234 wide and 476 deep. Being a single chamber design, like I mentioned earlier, we're saving about 40 to 50mm on the width over a dual chamber design. Top and front panels of the chassis are not removable, and as the top has no radiator support, there probably isn't any need to have this panel removable. Case rigidity with the side panels off was good and no flexing going on here. Inside the case there's support for up to ATX motherboards, but they will hang over the motherboard tray slightly. A standard ATX motherboard will go right to the edge. 24-pin cable routing is tight with EATX boards, but this area is angled, which does help. Something to note that when testing with my Aorus X399 Extreme motherboard and an EKPE 360 radiator mounted on the side, I had roughly 23mm between the radiator and motherboard. Just remember to insert your cables first, then your EHX motherboard as things start to get tight. You'll also notice no fans are included in the P120. I'm okay with this and find that most users going with a setup like this will most likely have their own preferred RGB fans. This will also help keep costs down. Other cable cutouts can be found along the side edge for your motherboard, 2 under the PSU shroud for EPS and fans, 1 at the end of the PSU shroud, while 2 more cutouts along the bottom for front I/O, USB and so on. Interestingly, there are no grommets installed for any of these cutouts. Video card clearance you'll have up to 450mm, which is plenty. If going with a custom loop and mounting a side radiator, I now had roughly 300mm for GPU length, and with a more custom GPU, things got pretty tight. Wide GPUs will also fit with no issues, and this is mainly due to Antec adding 3 vertical GPU slots. Just a note here that this is a free hanging setup and is to be used without a vertical mount bracket. Caution should be taken when moving your system if a vertical mount GPU is installed. No riser cable is included for the vertical mount. CPU cooler height is up to 185mm. Antec have also supplied a VGA holder to eliminate GPU sag. This holder is made from aluminum and is locked into place from the back. A rubber pad is installed on the part that will come in contact with your GPU. Case storage is pretty standard with 2 drive bays up the top next to the PSU shroud. These attach to each other and clip on and screw to the chassis. Each drive sled can take one 3.5-inch hard drive or one 2.5-inch SSD. With 2 hard drives installed, an SSD can be mounted underneath. Just to note that only one set of screw holes are supplied for hard drives that have the holes closest together. As you can see, the hard drive on the right won't screw down properly. Also, if you're installing a 360mm radiator in the side location, these 2 cages have to be removed, which unfortunately means you won't be able to install any hard drives in your setup. A 240 or 280 radiator in the side will work fine with the 2 drive cages installed. Around the back of the chassis you'll find 2 drive sets, each supporting one 2.5-inch SSD. While around the back, rear cable clearance is roughly 18mm behind the motherboard, but did narrow down to 10mm behind the side radiator location. In terms of any cable management features or covers, I found the bulkier cables will be kept up in the PSU shroud, while 8 cable tie points could be found around the back. Radiator support, you'll find 2 main locations, and starting at the bottom of the chassis up to a 360mm radiator can be installed, and it's nice to see slits here rather than single holes. Antec does state a max thickness here of 28mm, which is about right, as with the vertical GPU installed I had 50mm of clearance all up for fans and radiator. If not going with the vertical GPU, I was able to fit much thicker radiators even up to 60mm if only one horizontal video card is to be installed. Antec also state the bottom area can support either 3 120mm fans or 4 140mm fans, but only up to a 360mm radiator. I tried a 420mm radiator and it actually does fit, although it was really tight and would only fit if the fans went down first. Here are some shots with various radiators installed at the bottom. Bitspower Leviathan 420, Bitspower Leviathan 360, EKPE 360, Bixby 60mm 360. The bottom of the chassis is raised a decent 27mm off the ground, and I would have this as your primary location for air intake. One thing to nitpick here would be that the feet do need to be removed to install a 360mm radiator at the bottom. Moving to the side radiator location, and you'll find support for up to a 360mm radiator. This spot would be the primary location if installing an all-in-one cooler. If going with a side radiator only, thickness here is basically unlimited. If going with a dual radiator setup, side radiator clearance is up to 58mm if using an EKPE 360 at the bottom, or 66mm of clearance if going with a narrower radiator at the bottom like a Bitspower Leviathan 360. The side location can support either 3 120mm fans or 2 140mm fans, and no, the 420mm radiator will not fit here, nor do 3 140mm fans, but I had no issues fitting in wider EKPE or XE radiators in this location. For anyone looking to pick up a water channel for the P120, Bixby offer their RGB Antec P120. I briefly tested this and found no issues here. Lastly, the rear of the chassis can house either a 120 or 140mm fan, but Antec state only a 120mm radiator is supported. It's also nice to see slits here as well. A slide out dust filter can be found at the bottom of the chassis, while a magnetic dust filter can be found inside the back panel for that side radiator location. Moving on to chassis I/O, and on the P120, this is located up the top, and to me, I find this location kinda odd. I feel the I/O has been pushed so far back to eliminate any interference issues with the side radiator. I/O is pretty standard with power and reset switches, audio ports, 2 USB 3.0 ports with LED lighting around them, which is pretty cool. No USB Type-C found here. Alrighty, now for those who haven't seen the build in the time-lapse video, let's jump in and check it out. Now, before I go over the build and the extra features I did in the chassis, I just want to go over a few other things. Now, the GPU holder that does come included with the case, it can do a 3-slot GPU. You just have to remove the bottom screw out the back of the GPU holder, slide it down a little bit, and it works perfectly fine. Now, a lot of people said in the time-lapse build about it was kind of funny having the power supply up top with the hard drives. Now, to me, I think it kind of makes sense. You will get much better GPU cooling performance if your power supply is up top or around the back in a second chamber. Because in a build like this, not so much with water cooling, but if you had an air-cooled GPU, you've got direct fan cooling at the bottom to keep that GPU cool. Now, in terms of price for this chassis, you're looking at about US $99 or 145 Australian dollars. Now, that's not too bad. It's pretty much sort of a mix between an Inwin 303 and an 011 dynamic chassis, where it's got the single chamber, the hard drives and your PSU up top, and then everything inside here. Now, some other things I want to talk about especially was the little AMOLED screen I used up in the PSU shroud. A lot of people wanted me to show that, installing that when I did the time-lapse build. That was pretty simple. All I really did was just slid it in. It's actually not stuck in. I can still move it slightly with my fingers, which actually worked out quite well, because once I got my AIDA64 sensor panel on in the rough area, I could just fine tune it by sort of moving the screen around, because once it slides in and then the power supply slides in, it sort of holds it in place. The screen is probably, I would say, 20 millimeters wide, including all the components on the back, and it does have standoffs to mount it to something else if you are using it for whatever reason. And yeah, so simple, I just put it in, slid the power supply in, and that held it in. I did need to get some right angle connections for the HDMI, because once the screen is in, the actual ports are pointing out the top. So once I got those right angle connections, I could sort of push them out around to the side and then around to the back. But yeah, it was very tight, and this power supply does hold it in. But I will throw a link up for that screen. It's actually the first time I've used an AMOLED screen. Previously, before, I've used a lot of, say, like $50 screens from China, and they are just a standard TFT LCD, and when you have blacks on them, it looks very washed out, very white, whereas when you're using something like an AMOLED, it's pretty much just like an up-to-date mobile phone. The blacks are very deep and the colors are very, very vibrant. Mind you, it did set me back about $200 for the screen, which was double the case. But in saying that, I will use this in other builds. It was fun to play around with, and it was good having sort of the connections on top of the screen, whereas the previous screens I used before, it uses a ribbon cable that goes to a daughter board, and then that daughter board uses another cable to go to the controller, and then that controller goes off to the HDMI and so on, whereas this is just one screen, one piece, and it is powered via USB. But I will throw a link up where I got that from on eBay, and it does use an AIDA64 sensor panel, custom one I made. I may put that up. A lot of people requested for that template. The only problem is that I could throw the sensor panel template up, but it had a heap of files to go with it, because I use all my custom images and overlays in Photoshop. They have to be in kind of the exact directories for it to all read right. Most people will probably load the sensor panel import file, and probably everything will be all over the place. It'll be missing fonts, it'll be missing files, and so on. But I will be doing a full tutorial on the AIDA64 sensor panel, because I have been censored a external little monitor from a company that is producing them. They have worked with AIDA64, and they do have some default templates for that, so I will do a video about all of that. Now, lastly, another standout feature a lot of people asked was the tubing. Now, I've done painted tubing in the past, mainly black. I've done them in my 0 RGB builds. Now, the problem with those are they do have a bit of gloss to them. I do use a matte black, but they still have a bit of gloss. Now, I wanted this build to be sort of a mix between some gloss products. You can see, especially with the RAM and the CPU block, it is a very high chrome gloss. Now, I wanted to sort of contrast that with the deepest matte I could find. So I went through so many different types of spray paints I could find, all the grays, all the dark grays, light grays. I tried undercoats, primers, everything, especially when you want to get like a matte finish. You don't always have to go with a final coat of something. It is just tubing. It doesn't have to be like if you're painting the case, you can just leave it as a primer. You can try all funky things. I used, the end product I ended up using was a Metal Shield zinc galvanized paint. And let me find it here. It's this one here. It was a bit of a pain to get on, but once it was on, it gave me a very rough sand-like finish. Like if I rub this enough, it actually sort of comes off like sort of powder. But it actually, I did a few coats, so it managed to stay on nicely. The only problem with this was it did show fingerprint marks through the tubing, so I had to make sure I sanded it all. I was very careful. I even think this bit here, took about 4 different coats, and when I mean 4 coats, the first coat I wasn't happy with, so I actually stripped it back. I ended up stripping it back about 3 times to get the perfect finish, and even then, there's some areas that aren't 100% perfect. So when it comes to things like tubing and stuff and you want to play around, I think just go for it. Try a lot of different paints. You can try different colors. I've been meaning to try matte whites in a build. I think that would look pretty good, and for that, I'll probably just use a primer, because I find that primers give off the best coat when it comes to matte finishes. And it is just tubing, so you don't need the strongest finish, you don't need the toughest finish, and so on. And that's why I went with something like this zinc coating. Now, in terms of other parts of the build, some of the areas I like the most is probably this RAM. This is the new ANTEC Katana memory. It just looks absolutely insane. Now, I do have this set to the RGB off, and I think that matches perfectly with this whole stealth themed build. Now, we'll throw up a shot of with the RGB on, and this RGB is quite interesting. It is, once the RAM is off, it's chrome, and then once it is on with the RGB, you can see the RGB. So for diffusing, they've gone with sort of a 2-way mirrored chrome. They haven't gone with the traditional sort of diffused acrylic that brings off the RGB, and I must say that RGB is very, very vibrant, and it is diffused nicely. You don't see any individual LEDs at all. And then in terms of the motherboard, I specifically reached out to ASRock to send out the X299 Creator. Now, that's another area sort of people asked in the video, why did I use X299? They were sort of making memes out of it, and it sort of extends further than just using Intel or AMD. Now, Bitspower sent me their new CPU block, which I really do like, and it only supports Intel X299 or Z390, and it only supports AM4. Now, the only other board that looks like this is the ASRock X399 Creator, and that CPU block would not fit, which led me to using the X299 with this X299 Creator motherboard. And as you can see, it just blends in nicely with the rest of the board. The heat sinks come naturally grey, and it is a very dark board with very minimal RGB, though I did sort of turn any RGB features off to keep it with this stealth theme. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this build. I've had quite a lot of good feedback about this build being no RGB. A lot of people do want to see more, so I might start doing more of these type of builds in the future, and sort of getting back onto the chassis and this whole case review. This Antec P120 Crystal case, I think, is a very nice case, and it's nice to see Antec sort of going back to the roots, bringing out something more traditional. We've seen their previous cases. They do sort of look a bit out there. They're not for everyone, whereas a chassis like this can be a build for pretty much most people. It's simplistic, it's easy to build in, and I really do like the custom PSU shroud. And one more thing I haven't covered is this area can come off, and that's how I actually do the pass-throughs to go through. There's a screw at the top, 2 screws around the back, and this black plastic bit can come off. So even if you don't want to use it in the build, that will make the power supply shroud end open at the back. And if you want to do some modding, or you want your cables to come out the back, you can do so. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Very nice case from Antec. I think it is rather affordable at the US $199 price tag. But anyway, I want to thank you guys for watching. Thank you for Antec for sending this out, and stay tuned for next time.